Behind every smile that lit up millions of living rooms across America, behind every burst of laughter that echoed through television history, there was a pain so deep that most people never knew it existed. This is the untold sad story of Carol Burnett, a woman who made the world laugh while her own world was crumbling around her, over and over again. A woman who couldn't escape the cycle of addiction and loss, no matter how famous or successful she became.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you get nervous now after being such a professional for so long?
Do I get nervous when we have to do... No.
And the manager just says, "What's going on here?" And this woman says, "She won't let us sit down. We want to go to sit down." And I said, "But Mr. Batten," that was his name, Batten. I said, "It's Hitchcock."
Carol Creighton Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas, during the darkest days of the Great Depression. While other children dreamed of toys and birthday parties, Carol's childhood was a daily fight for survival. Her parents, Joseph and Ina Louise Burnett, had big Hollywood dreams. They wanted fame, fortune, and stardom. But their ambitions drowned in bottles of whiskey and gin.
Well, my first memories are being in Texas when I was a little bitty thing. And I remember we lived in an old house, kind of like a plantation house with a wraparound porch.
When Carol was barely old enough to understand what was happening, her parents abandoned her. They left their little girl behind in Texas with her grandmother and took off for Los Angeles, chasing dreams that would never come true. Her parents hoped they would strike it big in Hollywood, but the only thing that grew bigger was their addiction. What followed was divorce, dysfunction, and a complete collapse into alcoholism that would haunt Carol for the rest of her life. In 1940, 7-year-old Carol and her grandmother, Mabel White, whom she lovingly called Nanny, moved to Hollywood to reunite with her mother. But this wasn't the glamorous Hollywood of red carpets and movie premieres. This was the Hollywood nobody talks about, the one hidden in the shadows. They lived in a run-down building called the Hollywood Arms, crammed into a tiny studio apartment. Carol slept on a pull-out couch every single night until she was 21 years old. Clothes hung from every surface because there was no closet space. They survived on government welfare, scraping together pennies just to eat. Carol later admitted her childhood was not pleasant, though she tried to downplay just how miserable it really was. But how could it not be devastating when your father was too drunk to hold down a job? How could it be okay when your mother was slowly dying from alcoholism and couldn't even take care of you?
Unfortunately, my dad had the disease of alcoholism. He was just sweet. I mean, but he couldn't control it. And then my mother became an alcoholic.
Young Carol watched her parents destroy themselves one drink at a time. Her father, Joseph, was what she called a good-natured drunk. When he drank, he became sweeter and kinder, but he was completely useless. He had the disease of alcoholism, and it made him unable to provide for his family or be a real father. Carol later compared him to actor Jimmy Stewart when he was drunk, gentle and lovable, but completely ineffective at everything that mattered. Her mother was different. The alcohol didn't make her sweet. It made her sick, destroying her body and mind from the inside out. Little Carol, in all her childhood innocence, blamed herself for their addiction. She believed that her parents could quit drinking if they really wanted to, if only she could be good enough, smart enough, helpful enough. She carried the crushing weight of their disease on her tiny shoulders, thinking she could somehow save them if she just tried harder. But children cannot save their parents from addiction. No amount of love, no amount of trying, no amount of being perfect can cure someone else's disease. Carol eventually learned this heartbreaking truth, that you simply cannot fix addiction, but it was a lesson that would haunt her for decades to come. The poverty was unbearable. Carol's grandmother Nanny resorted to stealing silverware from restaurants because they couldn't even afford utensils to eat with. Yet somehow, in the midst of all this darkness, Nanny found a way to give Carol hope. Whatever pennies they could scrape together went toward going to the movies. Despite being on welfare, Nanny and Carol would save every cent they could to escape into the local theater. Those movies became Carol's salvation. They were her window into a world where people were happy, where they sang and danced, where problems were solved and everything turned out okay in the end. Carol was deeply influenced by seeing those happy people on screen, watching the dancing and singing, experiencing comedy and joy. The movies back then weren't cynical, she later recalled. They gave her something to believe in when her real life offered nothing but pain.
Well, I had dreams first about being a cartoonist and having my own comic strip. I would draw at the drop of a hat. Then I thought, well, I'll be a journalist like my mother wants me to be. We always sang, my mother and grandmother and I, around the kitchen table.
But reality always came crashing back. Both of Carol's parents died in their 40s from complications related to their alcoholism. She lost them before she ever really had them, before they could ever be real parents to her. Despite the nightmare of her childhood, Carol had an undeniable gift. She could make people laugh with a natural comedic timing that couldn't be taught or faked. When she graduated from high school, she dreamed of attending UCLA to study journalism. But that dream required $43 for tuition, and they didn't have 43 cents, let alone $43. Then something miraculous happened. One morning, an anonymous envelope appeared in Carol's mailbox containing a $50 bill. There was no note, no name, no explanation. Just $50 that would change her entire life. Carol still doesn't know who sent it, and the identity of her guardian angel remains a mystery to this day. Carol enrolled at UCLA and discovered theater. During a class performance, she delivered a line in a funny voice, and the entire room erupted in laughter. She felt the warmth of all that appreciation wrapping around her like a blanket, and in that moment, she knew she had found her true calling. Another miracle followed. After performing with other students, a wealthy couple approached Carol and her boyfriend. They offered her an interest-free loan of $1,000 to move to New York and chase her Broadway dreams. The only condition was simple. When she made it big, she had to help someone else the same way.
I'd always said I wanted to go to New York because that's where the musicals were. I wanted to be Ethel Merman or Mary Martin or that kind of person, you know, but we had no money.
In 1954, Carol arrived in New York City, terrified and alone, living in a boarding house for single women. She landed a role in a musical called Once Upon a Mattress, playing Princess Winifred. One fateful night, during a performance, she noticed someone in the audience with unmistakable orange hair. It was Lucille Ball, the biggest star in television. After the show, Lucille Ball came to Carol's dressing room and knocked on the door. When Carol opened it, Lucy greeted her warmly, calling her kid. Ball was 22 years older than Carol, and immediately took her under her wing like a mentor. They talked for half an hour, and before leaving, Lucy told Carol something she would never forget. If she ever needed anything at all she had to do was call. 3 years later, Carol was preparing her first major TV special and desperately needed a big-name guest star. She remembered Lucy's promise and nervously called her. Lucy answered enthusiastically, and when Carol started explaining her situation, Lucy interrupted her mid-sentence and asked just one simple question. "When do you want me?" Lucille Ball became more than Carol's mentor. She became a true friend. Every single year without fail, Lucy sent Carol birthday flowers. Their friendship continued until Ball's death on April 26, 1989, which happened to be Carol's 56th birthday. That afternoon, even though Lucy had just passed away, Carol received flowers with a card that read, "Happy Birthday, Kid." Lucy had arranged for the flowers before she died, keeping her promise to Carol one final time, even from beyond the grave. By 1967, Carol Burnett had achieved the impossible. She had her own variety show that would run for 11 glorious years, win 25 Emmy Awards, and make her one of the most beloved entertainers in America. She was living the dream she had watched in those movie theaters as a little girl. She married television producer Joe Hamilton, and together they had 3 beautiful daughters, Carrie, Jody, and Erin.
I used to roller skate on there and then on the sidewalk. And I lived with my grandmother. My folks had come out to California. And so I was with my maternal grandmother, Nanny. And I remember I would roller skate on that sidewalk and fall and, bloody my knees, and she'd take after me with the iodine, and I'd be screaming.
Every week at the end of her show, Carol would tug on her left ear. It was a secret signal to Nanny, her grandmother who had saved her life. "Hello, I love you." When Nanny died during the show's run, Carol continued tugging her ear anyway, sending love to the woman who had given her everything, even after she was gone. On the surface, Carol's life looked perfect. She was rich, famous, and successful beyond her wildest dreams. But behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. Her marriage to Joe Hamilton crumbled, and they divorced in 1984. Carol had desperately wanted her children to see their parents as the perfect couple, like Ozzie and Harriet from the old television shows. She tried to create the ideal family she never had growing up, but perfection is always an illusion. Then came the nightmare Carol had spent her entire life dreading. Her eldest daughter, Carrie, started experimenting with drugs and alcohol when she was just 13 years old. 13. The exact same age Carol had been when she was taking care of her alcoholic parents, watching them slowly kill themselves. The curse had returned, and this time it had Carol's own child. Carol was devastated when Carrie fell into addiction as a teenager. For 3 years, it was absolute hell. Carol blamed herself completely, just like she had blamed herself for her parents' alcoholism decades earlier. She tortured herself with questions. Was there something I should have seen? What did I miss? Was I not strong enough as a mother? Carrie went to rehab once. Then she relapsed. She went again. She relapsed again. By the 3rd time Carol had to send her daughter to rehab, Carrie hated her mother's guts. But Carol had learned a painful lesson from her own childhood. You cannot be your child's best friend when they are killing themselves with addiction.
Your first big job in show business, the genius Paul Winchell, who was a ventriloquist, he hired you to...
You know all this.
I know about you.
You have to be a parent, even when it means your child will hate you. You have to love them enough to let them hate you. Imagine hearing your own daughter say she hates you. Imagine knowing that trying to save her life means destroying your relationship with her. But Carol understood that enabling addiction is not love, it's participation in someone's slow suicide. Finally, just before her 18th birthday, Carrie got sober. And then something beautiful happened. Mother and daughter began bonding in ways they never had before. They started working together, eventually writing a play together about Carol's traumatic childhood. They worked together in 3 different shows over the years. The play they wrote together was called Hollywood Arms, based on Carol's memoir about growing up in poverty with alcoholic parents. Mother and daughter, both survivors of addiction in different ways, collaborated to tell the story of the pain and alcoholism that had shaped their entire family for generations. For 20 years after Carrie got sober, they were inseparable, joined at the hip. Carrie developed a life philosophy that kept her going every single day. She would wake up and decide that today she was going to love her life. It was her mantra, the words she lived by as a recovering addict, determined to stay clean and appreciate every moment. In January 2002, Carrie Hamilton was diagnosed with lung cancer that had already spread to her brain. She was only 38 years old, the same age many people are just starting to figure out their lives. Carol had to watch her daughter die slowly, watching disease consume Carrie the same way addiction had nearly consumed her years before. Even as she was dying, Carrie held on to her mantra about waking up every day and choosing to love life. Those words defined who she had become, a woman who had conquered addiction and learned to cherish every single day she was given. On January 20th, 2002, Carrie died, and Carol's world shattered. Every mother's worst nightmare had come true. Carol later admitted she didn't want to get out of bed for a while after losing her daughter. The grief was overwhelming, suffocating, unbearable. But Carol had a play to produce. Their play, Hollywood Arms, the story of Carol's childhood that she and Carrie had written together. So Carol forced herself out of bed. She went to rehearsals. She directed a Broadway production about her own traumatic childhood while actively grieving the death of her firstborn daughter. That's the kind of impossible strength it takes to survive a life like Carol Burnett's. The play opened on Broadway later that year. Carol sat in the theater and watched actors portray her alcoholic parents, her suffering childhood, her beloved nanny. She watched her daughter's final gift to her unfold on stage, a legacy of their shared pain transformed into art. Michelle Paulk, who played Carol's mother, even won a Tony Award for her performance. But the family curse wasn't finished with Carol Burnett. Not even close. Carol's youngest daughter, Erin, fell victim to the same disease, battling drug and alcohol addiction for 19 years. The curse that killed Carol's parents and nearly destroyed Carrie now had another victim. In July 2020, Erin attempted suicide. The LAPD conducted a wellness check, and she was placed on psychiatric hold, hospitalized at 2 facilities. Her life spiraled out of control, and there was an innocent child caught in the chaos, her 13-year-old son, Dylan. Court documents revealed Dylan was living in unstable, unpredictable, and unhealthy conditions. The California Department of Children and Family Services had investigated multiple times in 2018 and 2019. At 87 years old, Carol made the most heartbreaking decision. She took her own daughter to court, fighting for legal custody of her grandson because Erin was incapable of caring for him. Think about this. Carol was abandoned by alcoholic parents, who both died from their disease in their 40s. She fought desperately to save Carrie from addiction, succeeded in getting her sober, only to lose her to cancer at 38. She watched Erin fall into the same trap. Now, in her 90s, she's raising her grandson because history repeated itself. 4 generations destroyed by addiction. Carol attended Al-Anon support groups, learning the most important lesson. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it. You can't fix people, no matter how much you love them. Addicts must save themselves. Carol Burnett has won every award imaginable: Golden Globes, Kennedy Center Honors, Presidential Medal of Freedom. Millions adore her. She's an icon who opened doors for every female comedian after her. But those awards couldn't protect her from addiction's curse. Fame couldn't bring back her parents or Carrie. The laughter she gave millions couldn't stop her private tears. When you watch her tug her ear at the end of each episode, remember, the woman making you laugh grew up in desperate poverty, watched her parents die from alcoholism, lost her daughter at 38, and now raises her teenage grandson because her other daughter remains trapped in the cycle. Despite shattering every barrier, she couldn't break the one that mattered most. That's Carol Burnett, making the world laugh while carrying unimaginable pain. Still surviving, still tugging her ear for the grandmother who saved her.